Hey everybody, good afternoon. I'm just going to give my video a couple minutes to load, but I wanted to pop in and answer some questions I got about targeting morphology and language therapy. Okay, I think we are live right now. All right, here we go. So I got a great question in my inbox, particularly about the Word Study Toolkit for SLPs, which is a massive resource that includes a whole bunch of different affixes and orthographic concepts. Basically, there's a whole bunch of prefixes, suffixes, there's some root and base words, and then also some multiple meaning words that you can use if you are working with your students on building their vocabulary skills, if they struggle with decoding and reading comprehension and overall processing, as well as spelling and writing. And if all of those things are impacting their vocabulary skills, you are definitely going to like this video. So one of the things that I teach my students in my signature program, Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, is how to work on morphological knowledge, because it's one of those things that really builds vocabulary. A lot of times when kids are struggling to state the main idea or answer inferencing questions, it's because they don't really have solid vocabulary skills. And also, especially when they're struggling to learn to read or spell, or when they're struggling with writing, a lot of times it's taking them so much energy to figure out how to decode an individual word or to spell an individual word that the overall message gets lost. So this means that their writing might have a lot of errors in it. Their sentences might be really short. The message might not make sense, or they might not be able to comprehend the overall message in the sentence when they are trying to read something. So of course, when you're asking them inferencing questions or WH questions about what just happened, they're really confused because they use so many cognitive resources, they don't have anything left for that comprehension. So the Word Study Toolkit will help you to build those spelling skills and those vocabulary skills. A lot of times we think, oh, speech pathologists, we're not really, spelling isn't really something that we should be working on, but we want to be working on skills that build our students' vocabulary. No, obviously, if you're just doing rote drill and kill things like having kids memorize their spelling list, well, that doesn't work very well anyways. So obviously you shouldn't be doing those kinds of things in your therapy. But if you are working on skills that actually build your students' vocabulary and processing, that is absolutely a language-based skill. So I wanted to dive into some questions I got about how to actually do that, particularly when it comes to the Word Study Toolkit. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to share my screen so that you can actually see a little bit of a tour of the toolkit as I'm talking. There we go. Okay, so here it is. Here's the beginning of it. And so here's the overview of what's in here. We've got the beginning part, which is just some definitions with key concepts of morphology and orthography. Part 1 will give you a list of definitions and flashcards for prefixes that you can work on. Part 3 is roots and bases. Part 4 is the suffixes. Part 5, we have multiple meaning words, and then I've got the references at the end. So you can kind of see the first part are all the definitions here. So a lot of times people might ask things like, what's the difference between a root, a base, a stem? I talk about that at the beginning. And I've got some cue cards here so you can talk about those things with your students. And this can also just help you to figure out how you can break words down for your students, just to give you a good understanding of it. So that's the beginning. And then the main parts here, we always have a quick guide, which will give you the probe, whether it be the prefix or suffix, the meaning, and then examples of its use. And then you've got the flashcards here. So that's how that's laid out. So I wanted to get to the question that I got the other day. And that is, obviously in this guide, there are a ton of different probes. Where do we start? So how do we know which ones to work with our students? And obviously the way that you're going to do it is you're going to either start with your prefix and then start building words with that prefix, or whatever the target is for the session, or you can do it the other way around, where you have some specific words that might have that prefix in it, and then you're pulling apart those words and breaking them down and looking at what the different morphemes mean. So there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. But the question I always get is, how do I know which ones to start with? What's the hierarchy and what words are age appropriate? And I've talked about this before, but when we're talking about vocabulary skills like this, it's really hard to say, especially with elementary, because of the way developmental milestones work. Yes, we've got some specific milestones until kids are about 6. And then after that, it's so variable depending on exposure, because a lot of these are very academic skills and it depends what they've been taught. So to say this vocabulary word or this prefix or this suffix or whatever should be known at, 10 years and 3 months or whatever, we just don't have anything that exists like that. And to narrow it down like that would be counterproductive because, again, it's so dependent on environment. So instead of asking the question of what's age appropriate, I always ask, what are kids being exposed to and what's relevant to them? Because that's going to give you more of an indication of what they might actually know. So when I figure out where to start, honestly, don't overthink it. Pick something. You might want to maybe talk to teachers, look at some of their curricular materials. If they do some kind of grammar or prefix or suffix exercise, take a look at some of their curricular materials and pick some suffixes that you might see in some of their vocabulary words. Or honestly, just pick one that's pretty common and start with one at a time. The content is important, but the process is just as important. And what's going to happen is that you have this massive list of probes available to you, and you're going to be able to build your students' vocabulary. But the thing is that you don't have to teach every single one to your students for them to get this concept. You want them to learn what some of those morphemes mean, but you also want to get them to understand that concept that there are parts in words and you can figure out what they mean, because once they start to look for those different parts in words, they're going to start to infer some of this stuff on their own. I will tell you, as far as development goes, even though multimorphemic words, kids aren't really reading and spelling them accurately, it gets really, really prevalent in the later elementary years when kids are really reading a lot and reading to learn. But a lot of times we assume, we've got to stick with the basic stuff in early elementary. Not true at all. Kids can start to use prefix and suffix knowledge in those early elementary years as early as 1st grade. So yes, you're studying these. You can study these as early elementary. It doesn't mean that you expect kids to know all of them perfectly or be able to read and spell really long multimorphemic words without assistance. But you want to start giving that exposure sooner rather than later, because kids are able to cue into that knowledge. And if you wait until they have to have those skills, then a lot of times it's too little too late. They are starting to pick up on that and start to know a lot of those words in oral language. So we want to make sure that we're talking about written language as well. So that's as far as figuring out what's age appropriate. Just you want to start to pick the roots, the bases, the prefixes, the suffixes that come up in the curriculum and that are most common. And honestly, you can't do this wrong. I mean, as far as let's say that you pick one and it doesn't go well and you think, maybe I'll pick a more common one next time. No big deal. Just pick one, take action with it, and go from there. As far as writing goals, a lot of times people feel like, this is a spelling thing and I have goals for being able to answer questions or building their vocabulary or whatever it is. And they feel like, I'm working on morphology. I need to have a morphology goal. That's not necessarily true. And I'm not saying that you should never write a goal about specific spelling patterns, or that you should never write a goal for, let's say, breaking words apart into morphemes or inferring meanings of words using word parts. Those could be some of your goals, but honestly, the end goal is still the same. Targeting morphology is just the vehicle that gets you to the end destination, which is the goal. It's not necessarily the end destination itself. The whole point of working on morphology is to build your students' vocabulary so that they can have better decoding and comprehension. So in theory, this could be something that you use in order to get to your end goal of, let's say, answering an inferencing question, stating the main idea, describing what a word means, or whatever your goal is. So you don't have to feel like you need to rewrite your goals right away. This is just simply another strategy to get to that goal. And yes, you could add a specific goal later on if you feel like this is something that would benefit them, that you want to be targeted more specifically, but you don't have to do that. You can just start working on this right away if it's something your students need. An additional way to address it more specifically is that you might want to co-implement a spelling goal with a special education teacher, for example. That might be a way that you can do it. And they might have some insight as far as what specific spelling patterns and skills would be appropriate to put on their plan. So that is another way that you can do it, but it's not the only way. I know I had kids where I would work on vocabulary skills and they only were speech and language impaired as far as their eligibility label, and they didn't have specific spelling goals, but I knew that they needed to work on it, and we had some vocabulary goals. But then there were other students that did have a specific spelling goal because they were working on that with a special education teacher, and a lot of times the special ed teacher would be the one that would actually fill in the goals when we would send out the progress updates, but I would give some input on that as well. So that is one way that it can work. So that's how that works. That's how you want to address this skill. I will, below this video, I will share the link to the Word Study Toolkit if you're interested in checking it out. Again, building orthography and morphology are really important to improving our students' overall language processing. And another thing is that a lot of times, especially in those early years, a lot of the curriculum materials are really good at addressing things like phonological awareness. There's a big push for that the last 10 years, but morphology is so important, and a lot of times our students just don't get enough of it. So it's definitely something that you can incorporate into your therapy and really help your students make progress. So thanks so much, everybody, for watching, and I will share that link below this video. Check it out, and you can grab your toolkit today.